President Trump and Russian President Putin planning to meet for peace talks in Alaska this Friday to try to attempt to end the more than 3-year conflict with Russia and Ukraine. Joining us right now to talk about that and so many other issues that we need to get to. Council on Foreign Relations President Michael Froman is here. He's, of course, the former U.S. Trade Representative in the Obama administration. Good morning to you, Michael. Help us understand from your perspective whether you think a deal could actually be in the offing here and what that would even look like.
Well, I think the critical issue will be whether the president can secure a ceasefire, an unconditional ceasefire. The president wants to see the fighting end. The Ukrainians want to see the fighting end. Putin has insisted that the ceasefire come along with significant territorial concessions by Ukraine, and the Ukrainians, quite understandably, aren't prepared to do that. And so is he serious? Is Putin serious about ending the war or not? And if the president is able to come back from Alaska with a ceasefire, that will be a significant achievement. If they start getting into trading territory at Ukraine's expense, then it's not going to be a very good or sustainable agreement.
Okay, but I want to throw in a couple of chess pieces here. So we have one chess piece which really entered the discussion, entered the chat, as the kids say, last week with India, for example. So Trump is going after India for buying fuel and oil from Russia. I would imagine if I was Putin, that would be part of my conversation on Friday, for example. I might even be talking about some of the relationship issues with China as part of all of this. No?
Well, absolutely. It was very interesting that he imposed the 25% tariff on India for buying Russian oil. Who is the other country that is buying a lot of Russian oil? It's China, and there's no discussion right now of putting a tariff on China there. That would squeeze Russia quite hard. The president has talked about sanctions and another round of sanctions, secondary sanctions as well, putting tariffs on other countries. If he went forward with that, I think it would put significant pressure on Putin. But it's sort of been a one step forward, 2 steps back in that regard. There are a lot of issues to talk about between the United States and Russia, but critical right now is bringing an end to the fighting in Ukraine, and that involves really focusing on the ceasefire. Ultimately, there'll have to be discussion of territory. There'll have to be discussion of security guarantees, of whether the U.S. and Europe will continue to provide Ukraine with material support so that they can defend themselves. But right now, the issue is really the ceasefire or not.
Ambassador, I get that, but I just want to know in practice, because you've been in the room for these kind of discussions before. Putin walks in the room. Trump says, I want to have a ceasefire on Ukraine. Putin says, OK, but by the way, I have a laundry list of other things you need to do for me first. Is that not how this happens?
I think the question comes down to that word first. I think if Putin comes in and says, all right, I'm willing to accept a ceasefire, but you got to relieve the pressure on my oil sales. Well, that's a deal that could be talked about, right? That's the president using leverage to get Putin to come to the table to do something he was not willing to do before, which is accept an unconditional ceasefire, and that would put an end to the fighting.
Okay, let's move to a related but different topic, if you will, which is Nvidia AMD. This morning, the report suggesting, more than suggesting, that effectively President Trump is putting a 15%, what might be described as an export tax. Others are describing it as extortion or bribery. I don't know what to make of this. I don't think we've seen examples like this, but maybe you have, of situations where particular companies are effectively paying the U.S. government for the privilege of exporting to certain countries where, at least prior to this, we have discussed the possibility of it being a national security threat.
I have not seen anything quite like this in the United States. Of course, the place where you tend to see this kind of government intervention in the market is China. And we're sort of following China's playbook now of the government getting very much involved in the affairs of individual countries. As you said, Andrew, the real issue here is that export controls used to be this area of policy where you looked at the technology and made very hard judgments about whether it was critical to military, intelligence, national security that we not allow things to be exported. It wasn't an issue of trade. It wasn't something you traded away, and you revised them depending on the development of technology. With the recent decision by the Trump administration to allow the sale of chips that had previously been restricted under export controls, it makes a security issue more of a trade issue, and that's a bad precedent. The Chinese have always wanted to engage in a conversation with the United States about export controls as if it was a trade issue, and we've now opened the door to that.
You've just written a piece in Foreign Affairs, sort of a much broader sort of take on what's happening to trade and geopolitics as a result. Give us the top line summary, and I do recommend that folks go out and read this.
Well, the top line summary is that while there's a lot of focus, understandably, day to day on what the tariff level is, if you take a step back, basically the global rules-based multilateral system is dead. It's over, and we're not going back to it. The U.S. is following its own set of rules. China is following its own set of rules. When you've got the two largest economies in the world doing their own thing, then you can't really have a common set of rules for the whole world. It's not in our interest, it's not in the U.S. interest that there be total anarchy, that other countries follow our example and set their own rules. That's what trade looked like prior to the Second World War, when countries used trade as a weapon with each other. And so the challenge will be going forward, can there be a new set of rules that countries come together around, a group of like-minded countries around one set of issues, another group around another set of issues, so that there's at least some stability in the system. And that's going to require U.S. leadership in many respects. For some countries, it may be involve opening their markets and having free trade agreements. That's probably not going to happen here in the United States for a while. For other countries, it may be agreement on how we restrict technology or how we deal with non-market economies. Whatever it is, we don't want a system that's completely absent of rules.
And your sense of this being a permanent, sort of a new permanence, if you will. I mean, we keep talking, and I keep getting asked the questions, I keep asking the question, why you think that both the market and I would even argue business executives and CEOs, they may not be happy about the new tariffs, but they seem to have settled in. And this idea that they're sort of more sanguine about it than they were before. The markets have not, freaked out the way they did back in April, for example.
I think that's right. I mean, it's remarkable how people have adjusted to the idea that we're going to have somewhere between 10 and 50% tariffs on other countries. Right now, we have about an 18% effective tariff rate on imports coming into the United States. That's going to get eaten by somebody, by consumers who buy the ultimate product, by intermediaries, manufacturers who import inputs into their manufacturing process, or by the companies that will show up in reduced profits. But that cost has to be absorbed somewhere in the economy. And I think you're right. Markets have been pretty complacent about it. Had you asked them several years ago whether they'd be, when tariffs were an average applied rate of 2.5%, how they would feel about 18%, they would have freaked out. And they're not freaking out
Ambassador,
yet.
Is that just misguided mistake? That's just August optimism, and that somehow we get to the fall and the prices go up and they say, oh, my goodness, this is now a problem? Or do you think that they're really in it and that the markets are efficient in that the markets have spoken and this is what it is?
I think there'll be some adjustment, most likely going forward, in that tends to be a lag between when tariffs are imposed and when it shows up in inflation. Right. And there tends to be even a longer lag between when tariffs are imposed and when you see it in reduced growth. And I think at some point we may see those things. But the American economy, as you know, is incredibly resilient. It adjusts well. And we may have less of an impact than some of the strongest naysayers have laid out. But there is most likely to be some impact going forward. We shouldn't be complacent about the situation right now and assume that it's going to last forever.
I mean, a lot going on, Michael. Could be. People keep talking about how powerful that expensing capital equipment was and the big, beautiful bill. There's deregulation. I think oil's $64. There's AI. I mean, you put it all together, and tariffs might not be the determining factor for why the stock market continues to trade well.
Yeah, Joe, I think you're right. There are a lot of other factors there, and particularly AI, where we're not really sure exactly what the implications are going to be. It could be very significant over some longer period of time. I think the question will be over the next several quarters whether we see the inflation tick up or not, whether we see growth tick down or not, while these other policies are put in place or these other developments like the dispersion of AI take place.